introduction, 3-minute rebuttals to each team member, so 4 rebuttals, a 20-minute moderated discussion time, 5-minute closing to each team, and a Q&A session. So for the Q&A session, there's paper in the aisle, and I think there might still be some in the back. Or if you have any paper, just tear off a piece, and those will be collected later so that I can filter through those and ask the debaters questions. So our participants are Marlo.
Thank you.
He's from a small town. He's a marketing major at EWU. He has a crippling fear of public speaking and doesn't like writing about himself. He wrote this. The other participant on the atheist team is Griff. This is his debut debate. He's a technical communications major. He's been in the Eastern Atheist Club for 1 year, and he designed our posters. And he's a big car hobbyist. On the other team, we have Daniel. He is an assistant minister at Lord's Glory Church. He's a senior at the Moody Bible Institute, and he's a biblical studies major. He loves Korean barbecue, and he loves his fiancée, MJ. The other participant is Heath. Heath is a youth pastor, and he's currently a student at Moody Bible Institute, and he's from Spokane. I believe that is all. So I will be flipping a coin to determine which team gets to choose who goes first. So heads, tails, heads, if you want to see. So you guys get to choose first, second. What do you want, Marlo? You haven't decided beforehand?
Well, I decided it would be advantageous to go first,
Well,
but I'm
nervous?
Yeah, really nervous. So I'm gonna say Dave.
All right. So,
Channel 2, is it?
Oh, we're on.
That is
really on.
I'll start with you.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking the Eastern Atheist Club for putting on this event, and for Daniel for seeing it through, and each of you that have come and taken this time out of your evenings to be here and engage in tonight's conversation. I am a finite human being, so I don't come here supposing that I possess all truth, but rather I come hoping to be a student of truth. So as much as I come to share my position, I come to hear from the opposition as well. Now the question at hand is, can man be good without God? This question is worded in a general or undefined manner. So to make for a good conversation, I believe it needs further defining. First, what is not meant by this question is, can man be good without believing in God? This would create no argumentation. The Christian Orthodox position has always held that humanity, even apart from proper faith, can and do charitable deeds due to God's common grace. And so what is meant by this question is, can man be good without the existence of God? And to this, I would say, yes, but only in a fictitious sense or fake sense. Whereas with God, man may be good in a real sense or literal sense. The basic meaning of good is that which is proper, well, or right. Its necessary antithesis is that which is improper, not well or not right. Thus, to use such terms as good and not good is to presuppose intention. That is, the way things should be and the way things should not be. Without intentionality, there can be no way of saying this is right and this is wrong, or this is good and this is bad. And this leads to my my primary argument. And before I get to the argument, if I'm understanding the opposing position's worldview correctly, it may be defined by 2 isms: atheism, i.e. God does not exist, and materialism, matter is all there is. And if they don't hold to the second one, the argument will still stand. Here now is the argument. Because atheism is predicated on the presupposition, i.e. faith statement, that there is no God and thus no intention behind the origin and formation of the material universe, it necessarily follows that there is no way in which life was intended to be lived. Thus, there can be no such terms as good and not good, specifically because, as mentioned, good is predicated upon intentionality. That is, the way things should be and the way things should not be, or the right way and wrong way. In other words, to use terms or to say something as like this, proper behavior and inordinate behavior, to use those don't belong to a non-governed system or an indifferent system. On the other hand, such concepts belong to a system with government or intentionality. Atheists and materialists throughout the centuries, from Democritus onward, and actually prior to Democritus, have affirmed that the materialistic worldview is predicated upon purposelessness. When asked the question why atoms exist rather than not, the answer from an atheistic perspective has always been because they happen to exist. There is neither rhyme nor reason. There is no intended purpose. Hence, there is no intrinsic value in whether an atom exists or ceases to exist, i.e. whether humans, who are complex formations of atoms, exist or cease to exist, whether they live and flourish or whether they suffer and die. Therefore, in order for atheism to stay true to its system of thought, it must assert that there is no such thing as good and bad, but rather what happens to be and happens not to be. In further explanation, if the first cause of the material universe is due to happenstance or causal accidents, it then necessarily follows that the whole system itself is a result of happenstance and causal accidents. And if causal accidents are the reason for our present state of affairs, then existing, or moreover human well-being in itself is an accident, and therefore it's not intrinsically good, right, well, or better. In transition, I'd like to approach two specific arguments that have been used to support an atheistic morality or materialistic morality. The first deals with natural selection, the second with Sam Harris's moral landscape, or what I like to call the premature assumption. In regards to the first, some atheists like Richard Dawkins have made the claim that human goodness has developed through Darwinian processes. Morality has come into existence through chance variation and natural selection. In other words, genetic information informs humans of what one ought to do and what one ought not to do in a system that itself is oughtless. Let me explain. This means humanity is suffering from a form of schizophrenia. Humanity is unable to distinguish between fiction and reality. Here now is my explanation. Due to unguided genetic mutation, that is within the DNA, we think we ought to live a certain way, when in reality there was no intended purpose for that very thought or desire to exist. Such an idea that human well-being is a good affair is an accidental state of mind in itself. Hence why I said at the beginning that man may be good, but only in a fictitious sense or fake sense. Natural selection is predicated upon phenotype changes, i.e. express traits, what you see of me right now, what's advantageous to the environment. And phenotype changes are contingent upon unguided and non-intentional changes occurring on a genotype. Hence, natural selection is ultimately due to non-intentional changes, and therefore, the genetic development of values is in itself the product of non-intentional forces or non-intentional change. Thus, the schizophrenia. We think we should be good, when in reality, the very thought is the result of happenstance. Therefore, the real world consists of unintentional and indifferent causes, yet we believe we should live intentional lives, lives of difference, lives of wholeness. Simply put, unguided processes guide our lives toward virtue. This, at best, to me, is a contradiction, or humanity living in a schizophrenic state. With the Creator placing intention and intended purpose upon life, one can rationally say, we ought to live this way or that, or human wellness is better than misery. From an atheistic position, to say what ought to be and ought not to be is to impose on a non-governed system, government. On a non-intended system, intentionality. This, in summary, would go as follows. The concept of good and bad impose difference on an indifferent system. Lastly, regarding Sam Harris, his premature assumption. Sam Harris proposes that facts and values cannot be divided. That is, the reality of suffering on a material level is evidence enough to claim that suffering is bad. Therefore, there is no reason to appeal to an authority outside the event of suffering. Okay, you see a child suffering in misery, you see a guy wealthy with money, eating right and being healthy. You can tell just by the events that this is bad, this is good. Therefore, we don't need to appeal to an authority. But this just begs the question. This simply suspends the question at hand. Sam does not give a primary reason from his perspective why values are unanimous with facts, or why misery is bad and why wholeness is good. So someone might ask Sam, why is human misery bad from an atheistic perspective? Sam might answer, because it's painful. Well, why is pain bad? Sam might respond, because it's not a good way to live. Well, why is it not a good way to live? And this would go on and on. Eventually, in order to ground morality on atheistic framework, one must fall back on his first assumption. The non-intelligent, amoral agent of nothingness that brought life into existence by means of unguided processes informs us that misery is bad. In short, without God, morality is grounded in nothingness, indifference, accidental causes, which rids good and its antithesis, not good, of any and all meaning. On the other hand, with the existence of God, one may affirm that suffering is bad because, i.e. the reason,
God intended and purposed his creation to live in a state of wholeness, which Sam Harris is right. Wholeness is good because, again, value is embedded in it because it's been designed for wholeness. Shalom, the Hebrew word used from the very beginning with with Israel. Humanity is actually God's people in that sense. But furthermore, the reason for there's reason as for why misery exists. Misery is a result of humanity's disobedience toward God's intended design and purposes. And badness is not an entity or thing, it's actually a privation of good. So God didn't create evil, it's a privation of good. It's taking what God created as the good things and doing wrongly with that. The terms good and bad assume that there is a way in which life was intended to be. Therefore, if good and bad exist, there must be an intention behind the universe, a right way to live and a wrong way to live. Thus the necessity of a creator. Intention demands an agent or willful mind purposing an action. Objects, inanimate objects don't will anything. This computer is not going to will anything. This desk doesn't will. An agent, i.e. God. Furthermore, I would argue the triune God of Christianity, and to put this into if I have a moment, just, I think you have a minute. Okay. Just a formal syllogism to summarize one of the several arguments. A non-intended universe does not consist of right and wrong. Premise 2, an atheistic universe is a non-intended universe. Conclusion, therefore, an atheistic universe does not consist of right and wrong. Okay, thank you. Be helpful.
Thanks. If anyone in the back, I believe there's at least 4 seats up front that you could probably snag.
We don't buy it.
Yeah, maybe. All right, Marlo?
Alright, well, thank you all for being here. I hope you don't leave disappointed. I would also like to thank my 2 opponents, Daniel and Heath, for coming and for proposing the debate, as well as for their demonstration of great respect and kindness they showed leading up to this. So we may have different beliefs in terms of God and morality that in no way affects my respect and admiration for both. Now it's important to understand that tonight's subject is not over the existence of God, but rather whether or not we can be good without God. I suspect that much of this debate will be centered around the idea of objective morality versus subjective morality. Objective in the sense that even if everyone says that something is good, doesn't mean that it is. That is to say, objective morality is the idea that something is moral regardless of whether or not society says it is. This is important to understand since the belief in God requires one to believe that morality is objective and is not subject to change. That is, if there is objective morality, then by definition it would still exist if God went away. That is to say, if morality is in fact objective, and God gave us an objective sense of morality, if he leaves, then it would still exist. If morality is subjective, one may argue that we would need God. However, this would put my opponents in a rather precarious position in that God changes his mind, then there is no reason to believe that what he deems as good is in fact good. A Christian may ask that if I don't believe in God, then by what objective moral truth can I say that something is wrong? Without objective morality, any act can be deemed as being moral. If there is no God and we are just matters in motion, then by what authority can I claim that an act is either moral or immoral? I judge the morality of an act, not by what is written by law or in the Bible, but rather by my inherent sense of empathy, by my ability to see and recognize pain in others, as well as my ability to personalize and identify with that pain. This often leads one to altruism, the practice of selfless concern for the well-being of others. People who commit immoral acts don't do them because they lack God, they do them because they lack empathy. They lack the ability to identify and personalize the pain of others. I have heard it said that good men will do good deeds, and wicked men will do wicked deeds. But if you want a good man to do a wicked deed, that takes religion. So on what moral authority do I claim that an act is immoral? I make this claim based on love and empathy, the love that I feel for my fellow man, as well as for all of you here. If we do good deeds out of adherence to religious doctrine or law, that does not mean that we are good. that simply means that we are obedient. Oftentimes what is moral and what is demanded of us by law or religious doctrine are at odds. Just because Joshua obeyed God in committing mass genocide doesn't mean that he is good. It simply means that he was obedient. Being moral isn't just being obedient, rather being moral is doing what is right. As such, when determining whether or not something is moral, one must look beyond God or religious scripture. One may claim that the power of God makes his moral judgment right, but that is nothing more than might makes right, and I have met few people who would want to live in such a world. My opponent may argue that if I base my morality off of empathy, then where does empathy come from? It must come from God. I'm not embarrassed to say that I don't know where empathy comes from. I don't know where human consciousness comes from. It's one of the mysteries of science. Now, in the mid-early 1700s, there were two groups of people in regards to disease. Those who claimed they knew what made people sick, and those who admitted they had no idea. Those who claimed that they knew what made us sick would say that it was because of bad blood, and the best way to cure people was to bleed them. The other group, who said that they had no idea what made people sick, would say, I don't know. Try laying in bed, eat some soup, get plenty of rest. Unfortunately, people back then, just as with people today, oftentimes prefer bad answers to no answers at all, even if the bad answers don't have any evidence. If God had instilled us with a sense of what is good or bad, then as previously stated, we don't need God to be good, since we would still have this sense of good or bad without God. But one should also point out that if we are instilled with a sense of good or bad, that doesn't mean that action A is good. It simply means that we predisposed to believe that action A is good. There are two reasons as to why it is important for one to claim that God has instilled us with an objective sense of morality. The first being that God does not have objective morality. If God thinks, then by definition his morality is not objective. Ideas or thoughts are not objective. They are by definition subjective. The nature of God cannot be known. So even if my opponents are certain that there is a God, they have no way of being certain if that God is interested or disinterested. You may know my nature, but you do not know the nature of God. For all you know, God is indifferent. However, some claim that they do know the nature of God. These people oftentimes base this claim on their interpretation of the Bible. But since an interpretation, as with any interpretation, is subjective, as such, one may claim that moral teachings of any religious doctrine is objective or true. If you have read the Bible, then you must know that God's sense of morality is subject to constant change. God tells the Israelites, "Thou shalt not kill," but immediately following this orders them to go on a brutal campaign of genocide. If you base your morality off God, of the God of the Bible, of the biblical description, then you must believe that the genocide committed by the Israelites was both good and moral. It's in this manner that one is robbed of their humanity, robbed of their ability to feel empathy for others. It's what causes us to justify acts that are unjustifiable.
Thank you.
That's it.
All right, on to our first rebuttal. Whenever you're ready.
Trying to unpack how you just defined good, and that was apathy? Is that where you were going with that?
That's kind of how I decide whether an action is good or bad. For example, if I see someone kicking a little girl, I am able to empathize with that little girl, see it from her perspective, see her pain, personalize that pain, that leads me to altruism, which makes me want to keep that.
So here would be my one question, I guess, the first question would be, again, given the system without the existence of God, no intended purpose, like my argument insisted on was, if we happen to exist, then empathy itself is an accidental state of mind. And in fact, if God doesn't exist, as there's no immaterial reality, then empathy itself is just the activity of neurons and synapses firing. And so really all you're saying is that your chemical balance is making you feel a certain way. So basically, I'm seeing all kinds of complications with that. So this would be, I guess, the question.
You're saying if we're just matter in motion, then.
Right, like what's, number one, okay, if life started just by meaningless causes brought us to where we are today, why should we listen to our empathy? Or what is even empathy? Isn't empathy itself an accidental process? And in fact, I would argue from a Darwinistic worldview, it would have to be. And so how would you answer that? How is empathy something to fall in an accidental framework?
I have no idea where human consciousness comes from. I don't think it's dependent on, the debate is over whether or not we can be good without God. So you may say that God created it. Gave us empathy, right? But if he leaves, that doesn't mean that empathy will stay. So whether or not God exists is irrelevant.
No, my question though is, I think I might not be wording it quite right, is that if your system is premised upon meaningless change,
right,
why then are you saying it's meaningful to live according to your empathy?
well, evolution isn't just kind of unguided.
Okay.
It's a product of environment. It's influenced by environment. So there's environmental forces that.
Yeah. The appeal would be, most Darwinists would argue and say natural selection is the guide, but UC Berkeley even puts on their site under misconceptions about natural selection, that natural selection is simply the result of variation. Variations are unguided change, a differential reproduction and heredity. It is mindless and mechanistic. It has no goals. It strives to produce it's not striving to produce progress, i.e. listening to your emotions or whatever you have, empathy.
Yeah,
It's not a. So anyway, by definition, your the universities that are teaching this at great levels are saying that's a misconception. There is actually no God behind even natural selection, which is used. So again, I would push back and say even what is said to be a God is actually tends to be self-discrete. It's based on genetic change, which is.
The genetic change is random, but what genes are successful?
I'm gonna have to, time is up for this round.
I'm sorry.
This is my first time in debate too, so we're all over the board, as you can tell.
So, just to clarify, we will have a time for discussion later. We want discussion, but for now, you can ask one sentence, one answer questions, but try to keep your rebuttal to a projection to the audience. Time for your rebuttal?
I just want to clarify something about our opponents real quick. Simplifying a little bit, you mentioned that atheists say that there's no intention or inherent purpose behind the creation of the universe and creation of everything in it, from an atheistic point of view. I'm struggling to see how that means that there would be no good or bad, or that morality in itself wouldn't exist that way. Is it not our duty as sentient, sympathetic, intentional beings to affix some sort of value to what is around us? Have you read Watchmen? You know. Has anyone here read Watchmen? Thank you. Existence may be random, has no meaning aside from what we choose to assign to it. And that is because we are, like I said, sentient, cognizant, sympathetic beings. We have the ability to see something and say, to me, this is good or this is bad. Now, this may appear to have a sense of objectivity about it, but would that not more likely be just widely agreed upon consensus of society? Now, if I punched Marlo in the face, that would not be very nice for me to do. But if he's holding Zachariah by the throat, about to choke him, punching him in the face would be the proper thing to do to keep him from strangling Zach. So I don't want to strangle Zach, it's up for debate. But what I'm saying is that just because atheists may not see intention in the universe doesn't mean that we can't use what we have found ourselves with, or whatever process we want to choose to assign to our conscience or our level of empathy. Just because we don't inherently see purpose to the universe doesn't mean that we can't put a purpose to it. We all have brains, we can all think, we can all look and see and deduce. So if we look at it from that point, then where would there be a necessity for a deity of some kind to inflict an objective morality? We can do it ourselves. And I mean, looking at a broader sense, it's not whether or not Marlo is choking Zach. It's what is best for society. And Zach being dead is not best for society. Therefore, society would widely agree upon that any course of action to prevent Marlo from choking Zach would be moral. Now, that's based upon the situation entirely, but you can see that it would more be up to us to decide what is good and what is bad, dependent on our surroundings and the context in which it's happening.
All right, good. That's 3 minutes. Thank you. Back to you guys.
Boy, there's a lot of stuff here. Okay, just real quick, only got 3 minutes, so there's a lot of things that our opponents have addressed. The first thing that he actually addressed was something called moral platonism. And now what moral platonism is saying that there are actually objective moral values without God. And so in one sense, even if there is no God, we still have objective moral values. And actually that's what Plato would formalize, and that's the argument that he would state. However, if you look at this carefully, to say that there's actually objective moral values and duties without God in one sense, as if it's just an entity, it could lead to absurd results. For example, the value like justice. It seems very absurd that justice can exist, for example, without people, because justice itself isn't just. And it already presupposes that there will be people in order to be there, in order for objective moral values. And another thing, Marlo, he brought about saying that love and empathy is actually the standard of goodness. And in actuality, it does seem like a good thing. However, the only problem with this is you're saying that it's mere feelings are what makes right and wrong.
Right.
Now, there's some problems with that. The reason why I say that is because if the amount of pain constitutes what's more moral or non-moral, then it would logically follow that the places that have more pain would be considered more immoral places. So this will lead to absurd results, because this shows you that probably hospitals are very immoral places. And the reason why is because there's much suffering going on inside hospitals. Yes, there's human flourishing, yes, there's good, but a place with a lot of hospitals then will be a place that's considered actually immoral, because feelings and pain is what dictates actually harm. And this presupposes that pain is a bad thing. However, if you go to any coach, if you go to a soccer coach, a football coach, if you go to a dentist, if you go to a parent who has to discipline their child in order to inflict some pain, pain can sometimes be a good thing. If pain is a hugely wrong thing, then people in the military are all just going through just some immoral training because of pain. Now, here's another thing. So in that sense, it doesn't really follow. It doesn't really hold. Not that it's necessarily wrong, but it just leads to absurd results. Now, here's another thing that my opponent said. He talked about society is what makes right and wrong. So basically, if China says this is good, then it is good. But then if you look at Antarctica, they're saying that this is not good. For example, polygamy in Alaska is actually considered a good thing. However, in America, it's considered an immoral thing. And so the society then decide what's right and wrong. And actually, this could lead to some absurd results as well, because if society dictates what's right and wrong, then the moral reformers who are against the society rules will be considered moral deviants and immoral people. If that's the case, the very person who we admire Martin Luther King Jr. would be considered a very immoral person because Martin Luther King Jr. went against the society. He was against racism. He was against slavery. And in that sense, he would be immoral. People like Gandhi, who was totally against the society's standards, went against it, and he would be considered an immoral person, a morally evil, bad person. However, nobody here,
I'm gonna have to cut you
okay,
off.
nobody here would say Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. was evil.
Thank you. Back to you guys.
I'm kind of curious if you heard my opening statement. Martin Luther, I said that just because you obey the law doesn't mean you're moral. I said that it means you're obedient. Therefore, you can't base what is good or bad based off the law. That's kind of one of the advantages of subjective morality, in that it can change, it can evolve. If you say slavery is good and moral, and that is objective, then you've taken yourself out of the moral conversation. Morality can't grow, we can't advance as a species. I kind of feel like you took out of context what I said, what I meant by suffering as being immoral. I didn't say suffering was immoral, but, and you said using that line of logic, working out is immoral. I kind of think it's wrong too. I mean, I don't think anyone here honestly believes that I believe that working out is wrong because it causes pain. And I think it's unfair and really demeaning to compare working out, the pain from working out, to the pain a little girl feels from having acid thrown in her face for trying to learn how to read. Those are two completely different things. And I'm no way trying to compare the two. And if you look at places with the most suffering, it's usually due to religion. Look at the Middle East. So, yeah, that's all I have.
Calling good, okay. Thank you. I believe we are done with the rebuttal stage.
I guess I misunderstood what the rebuttal stage was, that's why I was asking
Sorry.
questions.
Yeah, so now, it's kind
That was
of,
good conversation.
yeah, that was great. So we want
I think we should
more,
go for coffee later. Right?
more of that
Yeah.
conversation.
Seriously.
So now,
If you go back into time,
I try to
With
speak loud.
how improbable that is. But if you, let's say you could go back into time to the time just before Jesus Christ was born, and you came across a group of Israelites who were living on land who they had taken from people that they had just slaughtered, and they would stone people for working on Sunday, or they would stone people to death for being homosexual. Would you say that this is moral or immoral?
One thing, this is a science and art of interpretation, it's called hermeneutics, right? So, context is the first principle.
Right, this is
Number one, this is coming from scripture, so it starts off with God creating. He created all things good. He created humanity in his image and after his likeness. Humanity rebelled. God could have justly, as a good, perfect God, sent us all of us to a state of condemnation. But in his love, he allowed humanity to continue. And in mercy, he redeemed a people called Israel. And out of that people, he displayed to the nations righteousness. And that the only way we can commune with a good, perfect, loving, all-powerful, good God is that we too be perfect. Otherwise, love has to be just as well. And so our sins separate us from him. He called the people out. He gave them the law. And the law was to show that all of us have actually rebelled and fallen short. And also, in regards to Israel going into the promised land and taking out Amalekites and all these others, this is actually, God owns the universe. And he showed himself in the Israelites' lives to be God by the miracles he performed. So this isn't just like other religions without any proofs. This is historical evidences as well within Christianity when it comes to archaeological findings. So this is not a fallacious groundings, unlike Mormonism and some others that lack archaeological evidences. So anyway, God showed himself to be with Israel, called them out, gave them the law, to show man how we can commune with God. And none of us are righteous, no, not one. Jesus comes, fulfills the law. Therefore, God's command now is either trust in my son's righteousness or stand before me yourself in your own filth. And so God has been gracious by allowing us to continue on his earth. And so I just think context is, you need to understand the biblical thing. If you're going to pull passages out, understand that this is a canon.
Well, I do understand the context in that the Israelites are God's chosen people, which isn't surprising at all and shouldn't be surprising to anyone else, considering they're the ones who wrote the book.
So
Yeah.
if I could cut in real quick,
Yeah.
Yeah, all these things are really good. And just for you guys, if you guys are curious, there's a really good book called Is God a Moral Monster? And it's by Paul Copan. And so if you guys are really interested in that subject, you guys can check it out. It's called Is God a Moral Monster? And Paul Copan, he addresses everything in there with the Canaanites, with the Amalekites, and whether if God was doing this and that. But however, I think for this topic here, I would like to really find out from the other side here, what is your objective, if you guys have an objective morality, I want to know what your standard is. And from what I'm hearing, it's love and empathy. And don't get me wrong, we Christians also believe, or theists believe, that love and empathy is a very good thing. I mean, everybody seems to know that. However, however, this is the thing. You guys were saying that morality changes, correct? Because back then, we thought that something was immoral. Okay, so
it changes in the Bible too. It's no longer
okay. Regardless of the Bible, because I'm not even bringing up the Bible right now.
No Bible.
Yeah, but really quickly, real quickly. So it changes then. Morality changes. However, here's the problem then. If morality is always changing and there's no real standard or ruler to show you whether it's good or wrong, how is there actual such thing as moral progress? Because if in order for moral to progress, there must be a certain standard that they're progressing towards. And so if there's no objective standard, which we believe is the nature of God, which is the nature of God, which is where we believe that goodness comes from, I just want to know an explanation. If morals are constantly changing, then is there really such thing as a moral progress? Because how can you say that one nation is better than the other if there's no real standard of what's right and wrong? Because this person's saying that this is actually right and wrong, but this culture is saying that no, this isn't right and wrong. And so where is that rule, and how can you say there's moral decadence, and how can you say there's moral progress?
Okay. If morality changes and it grows, then it can change, it can progress. If morality is objective, doesn't change, if it's concrete, then you can't have progress, because progress would imply that it would change.
So he's not asking can it change, he's asking by what measure are you saying a morality is good or bad or progressing? Progress implies a destination or a movement of some sort. How are you measuring that? Either
Towards
you
better
can answer
well-being.
this.
And so who decides the better well-being? That's what I want to know, because to one person, actually, it might be totally different standards with another person in a different culture. And what I'm just trying to find out is, how can you define if a culture is actually getting more morally better if it's subjective? Because subjective means that it could be just anybody's right and wrong. It depends on our feelings.
Right, absolutely. Well, I would say if you look at Sweden, low crime rate, high literacy rate, pretty good society to live in. Look at Afghanistan, where women are abused or for trying to learn how to read and mutilated. Probably not the best place for humans to prosper. So that's how I judge it.
I agree with you on that. However, if you go to the Saudis or if you go to the people in Iraq, which actually I have been there before, they'll tell you that they're actually the best people. They're actually doing good. And they'll actually think that they're the most moral place in the world because they're doing what Allah wants them to do.
Yeah, because they lack empathy.
And so for them, they're showing empathy by actually destroying themselves. That's actually their active duty. However, if you go to America here in our culture, we know that this is wrong. Especially with the 9/11 attack, what they did was objectively wrong. Whether America actually believed this was, if everybody thought that this was actually a good thing, it would still be wrong. Because we know that killing innocent people is objectively wrong, and we all know that in our hearts. And this is why, at least for theists, they believe that God has actually implanted to know a right and wrong, actually a moral law inside of all of our hearts, as it says in the book of Romans.
Can I pose you a question? So if everyone knows that these things in their hearts, then how do you go from everyone knows it in their hearts to everyone has their own subjective morality that they live between cultures and across countries?
Can you say that again one more time, please?
All right. You just said that according to the subjective morality that this team is claiming that there's different moralities based on what society and culture you go in, and we see that in the world as you pointed out. But then you also say that everybody has the same morality written in their hearts.
Well,
could you
for one
reconcile
thing,
those, please?
Even in our fallen condition as Christians, we believe we've all fallen short of the glory of God. We're depraved. That we have, by God's common grace, we understand He's written on our hearts, right, and things to a certain extent what's right and wrong, but we're not in our perfect state where Adam was prior to pre-fall, where we discern things clearly before God's presence. So Even after the fall, we agree that there's a level of consciousness within every creature that condemns us. Even our own hearts convict us of what's wrong. And so it's not subjective still. It's actually God placed in us by making us his creatures in his image and after his likeness, analogically in his likeness, that we understand right and wrong to a degree, but due to sin, where it's skewed culture to culture. Some people have, there's skewed, it gets skewed from there, but we could all agree, no matter what culture you go to, everyone would agree there's just some form of a law that says do not steal. And whether you're living in a culture where they exchange things and there's still a law that they know not to steal. They know that cowardness is not a good thing. They know that sending women to the forefront of battle is not right if you're keeping the men behind the lines. These are common things, and God put in us in our nature, creating man in his image. So again, it's based on God putting it in us, and then it's been skewed due to sin. So that's where you get that's where the subjectiveness comes in.
Yeah, but just to include, C.S. Lewis in his book called Abolition to Man, he actually did a study with all the different cultures, and he found out that actually morality isn't really so different after all. Even though there may be a lot of different moralities out there, in one sense, he had basically a list from China, even from the religion of Confucius to even Buddhism and to all sorts of different religions and cultures and people. He found out that there's a general principle such as doing good to others is a good thing. For example, to love our neighbors as you would love ourselves. Or they would say that, and he also said that respecting the elders and obeying the parents is a pretty widely commonly accepted thing. And he has different things like that, but it's not like the morality is totally different, but they all at least everybody pretty much knows that murder is wrong, rape is wrong, and courage is actually a very good virtue, and things like that. So just a little 2 cents in there.
Do you guys have
I hate to put you down, but so you're saying that it was okay what happened to the mass genocide that took place?
Actually, are you talking about, again, the biblical account?
Yeah.
Actually, it wasn't a mass genocide. Again, mankind rebelled against God. Israel was a theocracy.
Listen,
let me finish, please, sir. You have a theocracy. Call it out. You got to assume that. If you're working off the page of Scripture, you got to assume the narrative. Okay? So God, the God, called the people to himself. That he could have rightfully condemned for their rebellion against him from the first man, Adam, on through. Humanity's rebellion against God. So he could have rightfully, justly sentenced us all. We do that daily in our own courts, sentencing criminals who kill. We sentence people. This is the supreme judge. Again, given the context, God. He creates mankind. They rebel against him. If he's love, he must be just. Love is never unjust. That would be a sad condition of love. And so God calls his people to himself and to, again, bring righteousness and to show righteousness. And the Amalekites themselves were in rebellion against God, not necessarily against Israel. That was the whole point. That these were God. This is theocracy, ruled by God, and God bringing forth righteousness to his people. And so, again, why I made the distinguish why this is not, we can't say other religion, like Islam would claim something of that sort. And I would say, well, show me the consistency of your religion. Show me the miracle workings of God. I mean, we have the birth of Christ. Come and redeemed humanity through his saving death at the cross and rose again from the dead, which I believe is a historical fact and goes with all reason. To think someone else was on the cross while his mother and the Roman officials and the Jewish high priests were there, and then to see the guy raised again 3 days later to show himself to 500 people. We have evidence from a Christian perspective, rational evidence, why the Christianity started. Other religions don't. Anyway, so I'm going on a bunny trail. The whole point is this. It wasn't genocide. It was again God bringing forth justice upon people who were in rebellion.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and I want to try to summarize your positions.
Just
So the atheists, you're saying that there are cases in history, particularly in religious history, where God has dictated what you label genocide, and that is morally wrong. And your reply is that exists in a context that explains it as justice. Okay.
And so I would agree that if someone's out there just claiming with no, just out there slaughtering people in the name of whomever they want, then yeah. But again, that's not drawing. If you're going to speak from Scripture, speak from the whole account of it, and assume you got to start with their paradigm. If the paradigm itself is inconsistent, then blow it out of water. but the paradigm is I believe, consistent.
So, Griff, I haven't heard you speak much. Could you jump in here?
Yes, I am.
I want to look at something Daniel had said earlier. If morality is subjective, which obviously Marlo and I think it is, then by what way can we measure progress? Was that close to what
Yeah.
you were? Look around you. This is one of the most peaceful times we've been living in throughout history, and that doesn't necessitate an objective morality or a set rule book, as it were. And then I ask you the same question: in what way would objective morality? What kind of yardstick would we use to measure up against an objective morality? There's no final destination given. I mean, anywhere I can see at least, except accept Jesus and be forgiven of your sins. Okay, well then what? There's no end goal for honestly either of these cases. But we can see that just looking around. I mean, how many wars are there now? How much are people being persecuted? How many people are just killed in the street? This is one of those peaceful times we're living in right now. So, I mean, how can we say there's no progress? How can we say that where is the progress? We're living in the progress.
So just to sum that up, you're saying that in history we're seeing less crime, less murders, less war, and so we can measure our moral progress based on human well-being.
Yes,
Is that
based
correct?
on, if we look at the entirety of...
I think let's let John respond.
Alright, go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, human well-being, like for us as theists, we believe that that goodness is founded in the nature of God, because He's God, He's perfect, He's all good, He's merciful, and He's kind. And also we Christians would say one of the two main laws of what you could say the scripture says actually to love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And second is like it, to love our neighbors just as ourselves. So for us, that's what we hold on to, and it actually comes from the nature of God. It's not just because God says it's good, that's why it's good. It just comes from who God is, because God is good, and goodness is and because He is good, it just naturally flows from His nature. That's where we get our standard. But here's the thing. So you would say that you believe in Darwinism,
And what?
in the sense that
Macroevolution.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
or
Speciation.
he believes that morality. He would say that morality will come from social conditioning. For example, like in a naturalistic worldview, if you are conditioned to be good, and they're conditioning you in the society, then that's the reason why they would actually want to. They will know what's right and what's wrong, because the society keeps on conditioning them. And throughout the years, and throughout many years, they will have develop a sense of what's right and wrong. And if something is good, they'll feel that it's good. If it's wrong, they'll feel that it's wrong. And so I think that's a pretty accurate view of what social conditioning is. Now here's the thing. Social conditioning in a Darwinistic worldview can show you maybe why that something would be good or wrong. Like it could maybe explain, whether I agree with it or not, it could explain why something will be good or wrong. And, or at least what could be, maybe why we feel a certain way, that is, why we feel this way. However, it cannot tell us of why this is necessarily our duty to follow this to this value. Yes, love is, everybody may agree that it's a good thing, even Darwinism will agree it's a good thing, but however, where's that duty? Why is it that I'm obligated to love one another? Why can't I just not love myself? And here's another thing. If morals are conditioned, like I said, especially from the society, then the instincts should tell us what's right and wrong, and so forth. And also Richard Dawkins, he would say it's actually the altruistic genes. These are genes that are actually inside of us that happen through evolution that shows us what's right and wrong, and these genes kind of dictate what's right and wrong. Now here's the problem with that. Whatever is non-moral or non-rational should not be an indicator of what's good or bad. If it's non-rational and it's non-moral, that cause should not be able to tell us what's right or wrong, or we're obligated, and we all agree to that. But here's the problem. Genes are non-moral, and genes do not even have a conscience, and genes are not rational. And what I'm saying is this: in a total naturalistic worldview, we are going to have to say that these genes are the ones that shows us what's right and wrong, or possibly even the standard. However, these are non-moral agents, and non-moral agents cannot show us what is moral, and non-rational agents cannot cause rationality. And if anything else, what they would hold on to is this is actually an accidental cause. It's actually movement in atoms. And maybe possibly movement in atoms and these genes are what tells us what's right and wrong, but we know movements in atoms cannot tell us what's actually right and wrong. Maybe we might feel a certain way because of these genes. I'll give them that. Maybe we'll feel a certain way. However, there's nothing that will actually be an indicator to saying if this is really a right action or a wrong action. And if so, it almost just becomes subjective in one sense because the society conditions it in. Not necessarily that it's wrong. For me, I'm just trying to find it hard to understand because it leads to some absurd conclusions from his point of view.
You guys want to reply to that?
I think I'm having a little bit of trouble with the reductionist view that I'm interpreting that you're kind of holding here. Yeah, molecules, atoms don't have a conscience. You know, they don't have feelings or emotions or tastes or pleasures or anything. They can't think for themselves. But I am not an atom. Marlo's not an atom. We are more than that.
And if that comes from God, then if God leaves, we would
Can you
still have
explain
that.
how we're more than atoms, please?
Well, we are more than atoms in the sense that,
We have emotion.
yeah, we have emotion.
Where's emotion coming from?
If it came from God,
No, but
No.
I'm asking from your perspective.
I don't know. I already
Don't point it back
said.
here.
I
Give me an
said.
example
I
of
said.
where emotions come
I said repeatedly. I do not know where human consciousness
from.
comes
And I'm
from.
saying, yeah, so
I don't have a clue.
that's where you land the mystery, like
I have no
Harris
idea.
did. And Harris did that too. He says he presupposes that this is this, this is this. But your system itself is indifferent. It's in different causes, and therefore, why should we live different lives? Why should we live lives of difference? That would, again, like I pointed out, it's like living a fiction. You're doing something that you really don't have to do. So truly, being good is no better than going out and murdering someone, essentially. It's truly, if we're holding true to that system, if everything is a result of causal accidents, whether you continue living and flourish or you don't, it's just what happens to be, not what ought to be. So again, give me the ought.
Just because nature is indifferent or whatever doesn't mean that I'm indifferent.
Are you not nature?
I'm a part of nature.
Are you more
I'm
than
a part
nature?
of my environment.
Explain to me how
No,
you're more
I'm
than
shaped.
nature.
I'm shaped by my environment.
Exactly, and that's accidental causes,
Yeah.
which therefore serves that you have no better living than dying, right?
No.
Well,
Explain to me why not.
well, I'm in the same line. I do.
Because I prefer not to suffer.
Exactly, so you're living in a fiction because it doesn't matter either way, because your existence itself is accidental.
That doesn't change the fact that I don't like to suffer.
Exactly, but my point is you're living in a false reality. The fact is it doesn't matter if you suffer or you don't, according to the system.
Well, be it true or false, the reality I live
So
in, I
that's what I'm
don't
saying,
suffer.
I guess that's where we could agree on this, that from an atheistic perspective, you've got to live in a fiction. That your life is by unguided processes, but you can live intentional lives if you so choose. But that is not corresponding to reality.
So I'm gonna have to wrap this round up. Good discussion, guys. 20 minutes. Is that-
All right. So in closing, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. This is a massive turnout that neither of us really expected. I'd like to thank Daniel and Heath. That's wonderful. And congratulate Daniel on his recent engagement. So in closing, Mr. Kim and Mr. Robertson have provided us with some very good examples of morality. No one's going to deny that. And indeed, they appear objective, but I believe they're confusing objective with widely accepted. Society generally accepts certain acts as moral, but only in consideration of the context in which they happen and the people they affect. And even they have admitted this in the case of biblical scriptures and so forth. What we must look for in the question of the source of human morality is the lowest common denominator. Deities and theologies are not the lowest common denominator, as Mr. Kim pointed out in his reference to C.S. Lewis, who asked these various members of these religions and found that there is a lowest common denominator, which is morality. Buddhists, if anyone has studied any sort of Buddhism, knows that they do not have a deity or a god per se. So scenarios we encounter in life are not the lowest common denominator because how these scenarios cause us to act is largely subjective to the person involved and to the people affected and to the context in which they are happening. The lowest common denominator then is us, humans, every single one of us in this room right now. Without us, there wouldn't be a need for a concept of morality, just like you said there wouldn't be a concept for justice if we didn't exist. And at our core, save for the 1% of us who are sociopaths or psychopaths, is the desire to see society work and keep other people from suffering. Empathy, as Marlo has explained it. Now, humans don't even really need firmly established cognitive abilities or cognitive processes or higher mental functions to display traits of altruism that anyone would widely consider as being moral. Rats, chimpanzees, and babies have all been studied to deliver traits that would be moral given the circumstances. So we can see, excuse me, we are sentient beings. We can see, deduce, and reason and act of our own will. So it is hard to think that the desire to prevent suffering of society at large, which would generally be considered acting morally, can come from, excuse me. So what is so hard to see that what we see as acting as in moral fashions can't come from the people that are acting in the moral fashions. Society is made and interacts with these standards that we've established, so why would we need to go elsewhere for a moral framework that applies to us? These things were written featuring us, by us, for us, so why do we need anything else? If you see someone hurting, you try to help them. You see a possibility to shortchange someone for personal gain, and you avoid that and take the path of integrity. It's not rocket science to see that all of these things work. So is this saying that people are bad or evil? No, people want what is best, but they approach it incorrectly sometimes. This is the difference between being imperfect, which people are hugely imperfect, and being inherently sinful, which I would assume that our opponents would say we are. So we go about things the wrong way. What we need to realize is not some objective morality from a theistically devised framework, but each other. The only way to do that is through sympathy and understanding and compassion for one another. When we were establishing this debate, both sides decided that can a person be good without God is not a sufficiently debatable question, since about half of us in the room are atheists, at least. And we're living examples that yes, we can be good without God. So why is it hard to realize this on a larger scale? It's an interesting thought that the two things that all of these religions, beliefs, etc. have in common is that their ethical philosophies can be summed up as act for the good of society and people. The gods, locations and customs are all variables, but the lowest common denominator is people. And people and the idea that the good of society and the reduction of suffering should be goals is constant. So we are the lowest common denominator, not all the various theologies and moral frameworks that they have proffered from the side of Christianity. I see the floor.
Yeah. Thank you. We can give him a round. And you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Yes. Just for clarification issues, the word sin, when it's used in Christianity, I think there's a lot of ambiguity there, like we are not reading that word the same, but it's actually wrongdoing. It's missing the mark, biblical sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have some other connotation, that's not the biblical sense of the word. It's missing the mark, it's missing God's intended purposes in a innate way in which He's created us to live. So once again, good, as I mentioned, was based upon intention. For an example, if someone picked up a chunk of iron and started throwing it at a wall, right, just a random oblong chunk of iron, started throwing it at a wall, no one would say, hey, that's an improper use of that chunk of iron. That is wrong. Now take that same chunk of iron and form it into a 12 millimeter wrench and catch someone throwing it at a wall other than maybe, even a 3-year-old, usually a 3-year-old, if it's older than that, and that's even better. But throwing a 12 millimeter wrench at a wall, and you might think to yourself, well, that's not what a 12 millimeter wrench is meant for. That definitely is not, that would be an inordinate use of a 12 millimeter wrench. It was intended to be a tool, not a wall ball, right? It has intention behind it, therefore now it's defined a purpose, a way in which it should be. Again, since we all agree from various degrees
that life consists of what is proper and improper, life so proves to have been based upon intentionality. If intention is innate within creation, like they're proposing, we could tell that we should be loving. We should tell that we should apply ourselves toward virtuous things. Since this is innate in creation, it necessarily follows that there was a creator who purposed life, designed life, embedded life with value. As already mentioned, intention demands an agent, a willful mind, purposing an action. Inanimate objects, again, do not intend anything. Trees do not intend to go out and love another tree, right? So an object, nor does the concept of good will anything. It's just an inanimate, it doesn't do anything, a concept of good. It must be grounded in an agent. That's why we think objectivity is grounded in an agent, God, and that's why you cannot have objective good apart from God. So we would say, again, an all-wise, relational, self-giving, triune God purposed his creation to live in his image and after his likeness, to live in flourishing, wise, self-giving relationships to reflect the very nature of the triune God. We're relational creatures, and that is just another means in which we glorify God. Now, to finish, I would like to use a few syllogisms that summarize my time of study. Syllogism 1 I already mentioned. A non-intended universe does not consist of right and wrong. An atheistic universe is a non-intended universe. Therefore, an atheistic universe does not consist of right and wrong. Another one is premise 1. Indifferent causes are absent of good and bad. Premise 2. Darwinian processes are indifferent causes. Conclusion. Therefore, Darwinian processes are absent of good and bad. Another one. A non-governed universe does not have objective standards of goodness. An atheistic universe is a non-governed universe. As I mentioned, natural selection is not governed. Therefore, an atheistic universe does not have objective standards of goodness. And here's a three-tiered syllogism. It's kind of complex, and it deals with Samuel Harris's premature assumption. And this is just following an atheistic worldview, starting that life is an accidental cause and is trying to lead to value in life. And notice the inconsistency. Premise 1a. All accidental causes are neither good nor bad. Natural selection is the result of accidental causes. Therefore, natural selection is neither good nor bad. Natural selection is neither good nor bad. Human well-being is the result of natural selection. Therefore, human well-being is neither good nor bad. Premise 1c. Human well-being is neither good nor bad. Premise 2c. Value is unanimous with human well-being. Therefore, value is neither good nor bad. Essentially, the conclusion follows. If you start with a premise that says life is due to causal accidents, it will never change. Value does not come out of accident. Indifference doesn't beget difference, right? This is logic. And I think we all agree with logic and the laws of non-contradiction, so on and so forth. The conclusion that values are unanimous with facts does not follow, nor cannot follow, from an atheistic presupposition that life is the result of meaningless causes. And so, to end, if I have the moment here, premise 1, an intended universe does consist of right and wrong, as I mentioned with the wrench. Right? An intended universe does consist of right and wrong. A theistic universe is an intended universe. Therefore, a theistic universe does consist of right and wrong. And again, if we have time later, I would talk about the Christian deity as the supreme God, the greatest good.
Great, thanks. All right, time for some Q&A. So actually, I want to start with my own question. So I'm an atheist. I hope I was fair in my moderating.
You did well.
Thank you.
In fact, I thought you were a Christian.
So my question is, your statement that morality can't come from amorality seems to parallel the argument that everything needs a prime mover, therefore God. And so my question is, why can we assume that God, not knowing his source, not knowing anything behind his purpose, can be a source of morality, when him as a conscious sentient being, what gives him authority for morality over humans and their consciousness and their sentience and their agency to create their own morality?
Well, again, talking from a perspective with God,
Yeah.
well, God then is the unmoved mover, the perfect being, the one from which we derive our being. And so I would say his is a necessary being, and ours is is not a necessary existence, and so he created us, and therefore we have, again, embedded in us innate values and virtues and things that reflect his image. And so it's verified, God's goodness is verified, as you guys would say, you can clearly tell of such things of beauty, love, justice, mercy, kindness, all these things in life. Well, again, assuming God is the creator, that's obviously he'd be the one from which that was derived. And sin, again, from this perspective, is derived from misordered affections, missing God's intended design, I think.
Sure, thanks. To the other side, if morality is subjective, then what do you do with situations where two opposing concepts of morality conflict, i.e. you think thievery is wrong and someone who disagrees steals from you? Either one of you can take that. Do you not understand?
You want to take it or I can take it?
So if two people have two different moralities, what do you do then?
Which society would work better, I guess. I mean, you look at societies where stealing is perfectly okay, and then you look at societies where it's not, and you see which one is more conducive to the well-being of humans.
Thanks. I'm not sure which side this is addressing. Every man has a strong, I guess every person has a strong chemically caused sex drive, but most of society around the world believes rape is wrong. If morals come from genetics and also our sex drives, why has morality won over? Why not the sex drive? Why is restraint good? I'm not sure who that's to.
That way you don't have a bunch of pregnant women running around that can't tend to their children. You could even go with that with that Epicurean, I believe. It's going to bring about bad results. But from a Christian perspective, we'd say, well, because God created man for a woman, one woman, to represent, again, his nature in faithfulness, in covenant, in goodness, and commitment. Things of value is sex in itself is a pleasurable thing, and we would say God gave it to be enjoyed in a covenant where you commit yourself holistically to another, and and actual sex is actually the yes, I threw that word out. We're mature enough. I thought I got some faces. That sex is actually an act in which it shows the ultimate form of becoming one flesh.
Sure.
So if I could understand that question correctly, what they're saying is, if Darwinistic processes came to find out what's good and wrong from instincts, and basically sexual drive is an instinct, and so we should follow our instincts in, because following our instincts is considered a good and moral thing in an atheistic worldview. And so that's what the person is saying is, then why is it that when we have a sex drive, we actually want to pull down that instinct of our sex drive and actually want to control, actually want to use more of self-control. And so in one sense, I think what they would be bringing forth is something that C.S. Lewis brought up in his book, Mere Christianity, where he talks about if morality is done by herd instincts, and why is it that when we have two conflicting instincts, there's something outside of those instincts that says this instinct is better or this instinct is worse. And what C.S. Lewis would say is that there's an objective standard to rule which instinct is better. And so I think what that person is saying is,
so
why were you
where did I get
suppressing?
you guys to address that? So how do you, as he said, there seems to be a morality outside of just pure animalistic drives. Where does that come from?
Empathy is instinct, I would say. So, yeah. It's that simple.
Sure. So back to you guys. If two omnipotent deities disagree on what is good for a given situation, can humanity's sense of objective morality then tell me which deity is true?
Well, I would go with Anselm's argument here. If there are two deities struggling with one another, neither one is God. I think God has to be that being which is the greatest conceivable being. There's none greater. And so God, I would say the God that if God is God, then your two gods, whoever proposed those, would stand beneath my God, who is, again, righteous, good, stands alone in triune nature and community within himself. And so, again, I would say those sound like two dudes. And that would be similar to what the Greeks did with mythology and that type of stuff.
Thanks. Did you want to respond to that? Okay.
Well, the idea of a greatest conceivable being is subjective, Because what the greatest conceivable being to you is different to me. Like your greatest conceivable being may be the God of the Bible. My greatest conceivable being wouldn't support genocide.
Would you agree? Let's use for an example. Would you agree that God, if He's the greatest conceivable being, would be perfect love?
Yeah.
Would you agree He would be perfect in mercy?
Yep.
Perfectly just.
Yeah.
So again, we can use reason to get to the greatest conceivable being. And I believe if you understood Scripture rightly, that's exactly who it is.
Well, I've read the Bible.
I actually, well, we must sit down and talk.
Yeah.
I don't know if the same Bible I read.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And I don't know what we're, yeah. So,
well, I'm
again, I've never heard an or any, anyway, I don't want to, let's not do
I
that.
think we're just defining words differently. I define genocide differently.
We'll sit down and have a Bible.
So next question.
Alright, atheist. Empathy is a feeling, feelings change. How can you be guided by something that's always, can easily change?
Empathy changes, but we all have it. I mean,
I guess
love
it
changes,
comes back
but
to
we
the
still have
conflicting moralities. So, what if someone's empathy is different than yours? It's conceivable, right?
yeah. Then it's.
So how do you resolve that conflict?
Why would you want to?
Because it could lead to conflicting actions. So if you're making a moral judgment based on
Right.
your empathy, someone else is making a moral judgment based on their empathy. What do you do?
So we're looking at one event. We're both looking at it with empathy, but a different. I mean, empathy is seeing things from the perspective of someone else. So we're both seeing it.
I get,
I don't
their
really
comment
know.
is feelings change.
Right.
So I think they would want something more stable than empathy to base their morality on.
Oh yeah, I can't give you that.
Regarding recent scientific research on direct and indirect reciprocity regarding altruism occurring in natural systems, how does this bear on objective moral framework without God? In parentheses, S. It started off sounding like it'd be for them, but then they ended
I just say,
You both can take a stab at it.
I was going to say again, we're created analogic. We're created in His image and after His likeness, so it is embedded in us, and that we would hold as Christians that we're created with an immaterial and material aspect. That the soul, the mind, the heart, the will is actually immaterial, like numbers and things like that. You can't ground everything in matter, we would say. And so same with consciousness, and I am losing my train of thought.
Altruism, reciprocity, scientific research.
Oh yeah, and so again, the physical nature is meant to be conjoined with the immaterial. These two are not to be separated. So again, you're going to see that as the heart and the mind works within the material body that God gave us, these things are going to be playing off of each other so tightly that Scripture makes it clear that this stuff is unanimous. We do not. God created the soul to be existent in the body, and so your feelings do affect neurons and neurological pathways, and so they go together.
Yeah.
So
Just to clarify or summarize, are you both theistic evolutionists?
no.
Okay.
Well, excuse me. Let's define evolution. I'm a microevolutionist because I believe that has been objectively proven. Macro speciation, I am not.
Okay. Daniel, same or different?
Yeah, it's the same, but
Okay.
yeah, we don't think that, we don't believe in the theistic evolution.
Not that.
Okay, I thought you did.
Yeah, have
Okay.
a guided to do an unguided thing just seems a little contradictory to us.
But just,
Okay.
no, we aren't.
Okay, I was just.
But I do want to let them know
gonna-
that the word evolution entails a lot.
Sure. I was just gonna say that you believe that there are altruistic, animals do behave altruistically, but you would describe that to a mechanism that God put in place.
Well, animals like, say, a gerbil.
Yeah.
No, I would
They
say
don't have all-
they do have desires and things that are, but they're not rational, moral, loving creatures.
Okay.
Yeah, like Michael Roos, he's an atheist, so I'll just get from the authority from, he's a really
Yeah.
well-known atheist,
I've
Michael
heard
Roos.
you
Yeah,
say.
yeah, he's really good, and I have so much respect for him. Brilliant, intelligent guy. And what he was saying is this: in the animal world, for example, if a bird tries to take another fish from another bird, he takes it, but the bird doesn't steal it. And also when another animal actually eats another animal, the animal kills it, but the animal doesn't actually murder it. And when it comes to like cohabiting with different animals forcibly, they cohabitate, but they don't actually rape in one sense. So in that sense, he says that there is actually no real connection with that. So that's what he would hold on to.
Yeah. Could you guys speak to the idea that we can learn about human morality from scientific study of nature or animals?
Yeah, I mean, rats are known to be, rats have empathy. It's been shown that one rat will free another rat from a cage, even if he gets no benefit from it. Same kind of behavior can be viewed with chimpanzees. I think a big point of where we're kind of conflicting here is if you say that objective morality comes from God, that in no way hurts our argument. Because if it's objective, then it would still exist without God.
No, because our objectivity is grounded in God. It's not like there's some objectivity, just concept, spaceless thing. But our objectivity, the object is God, if you get what I'm saying. So we don't think you can have the concepts of all these empathy and all these things that you're mentioning without first there being an agent that they consist in for us as agents. As we agreed that inanimate objects don't will love and do these types of things, so it's grounded in a person.
Can I add something real
Yeah.
quick? That's the thing. Yeah, because like for example, naturalism, all that there is actually nature, and if I'm getting what naturalism means, there can be nothing more than matter or nature. And so here's the thing: what I want to see was, is there actually free will in nature? Like, is there actually conscience in that? It may be whether it be animals or whether it be inanimate objects. Is there anything such thing as a free will? Because if free will entails that there will be a conscious person, then that person can love, because love requires someone to have free will. Because if someone is forced to actually love, then that's not really love. Robots cannot really love. And so to love, you need to have free will. And so in nature, we don't find anything that has free will. With the animals, they don't have free will. They don't necessarily have, they may be somewhat smart, but they don't really have intelligence. They're not really real immoral creatures. A lion doesn't look at another like a rat and say, you know what, you got a really good family, and you know you're going through some rough times, so I'm just gonna let you go too. They don't think about that. They just go with their instincts and they grab a hold of it. And here's the thing: in order to have empathy, you need love. And in order to have love, you need to have free will. However, in naturalism, there's no such thing as free will. You can't have free will because everything is done by inordinate objects, unguided, purposeless objects. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but that's just what it entails. And so even to have empathy, you need to have free will. And in nature, if you could just even show me one example of something in nature that actually has free will, even in the animal kingdom. And if there isn't, then how can they actually show empathy?
All right, thanks. So I think I'll know what the answer to this is, but I like it, so it's kind of funny. Is it wrong to kill witches?
What is a witch? No, I mean it's not right to kill anyone for if it's not a just cause. I would think, and even then we need to argue over distinctions like in court. What do we consider a just cause for the death penalty or so and so and so and so forth. But
if I could just
that's
read,
an awesome
if I could just read behind that, I think what that person's trying to say is, you know, we in the Salem witch trials, we actually thought that killing witches was actually a very moral thing. But later on, they actually found out that actually this is actually a very immoral thing. But at that time, we thought it was moral. So here we see morality changing. So that's what they're implying and saying. Actually, see, moral changes. It's not objective, but what I would say to that is the only reason why they killed witches in the first place was because they thought that they're spreading diseases, and the witches were actually casting curses on people.
Well, I think they're saying that in the Old Testament it says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," and so they're saying, do you agree with that biblical passage, or do you not agree?
In the context.
During the context in the dispensation which God was working with Israel for those purposes, yes. But because the law was fulfilled in Christ, and it's not that the morals changed. Actually, this is given in covenants. Understanding Scripture again, the covenant with Adam in creation, the covenant with Israel. In that covenant said, you must uphold these certain laws, and then if you do that, my presence will be among you. And so these laws were specific to Israel to fulfill. And the reason they were given was, again, to show anyone deviating and seeking out other spirits, which, again, the Bible gives a context for demonic spirits, okay? So that's what they were doing, again, is rebelling against God, so God brings forth justice through his theocratic people. So there's a whole context, but it actually goes back to this God being awesome, great, consistent, loving, just. And you got to know the context if you're going to run with it.
There's more questions for you guys than the other team.
What
Which
are you referring
team?
to?
Yeah.